Picture the most expensive restaurant you've ever been to. The kind with white linen and candles and a menu that has words you can't pronounce, where the waiter refills your water glass before you even realise it's empty, and the bill arrives folded inside a little leather book like the number itself is too embarrassing to show you directly. Now take all of that, the warmth, the light, the careful selection of ingredients, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, washed their hands before they touched your food. Now throw all of that away, because tonight we're going somewhere that has none of those things. None of them. Not one. We're going to London, 1851, and we're going to eat. Not in a restaurant. Not at a table. We're eating in the dark, standing up, in the middle of a street that smells like a slaughterhouse, and a sewer had a disagreement and decided to settle it right here, at the exact spot where you're currently trying to chew. You're eating something that has been identified to you as a meat pie, though the meat in question has not been further specified, and you have learned very quickly that in this city at this time, further specification is not something you ask for. You ask for it hot, you ask for it cheap, you ask for nothing else. You hand over 1 penny, you eat. This is fast food in Victorian London, and the story of how it fed a city of 2.5 million people. Most of them poor, most of them working 14 hours a day, most of them living in rooms so small and dark that the concept of a kitchen is something between a joke and a dream, is one of the most astonishing, most disgusting, most brilliantly human stories I've ever come across. I make these history stories, and I'm fairly certain that most of you listening right now are in a comfortable bed, in a warm room, possibly with a phone charging on the nightstand and a glass of water within arm's reach. And I want you to really appreciate all of that tonight, because the world we're going back to had none of it, and the people we're going to meet fed themselves and their families and their city with a level of scrappy, desperate, occasionally nauseating ingenuity that genuinely keeps me up at night, sometimes literally. Subscribe if you want. Get your blanket properly situated. Make sure you haven't got anything balanced on your chest that might fall when you drift off. Here we go. The smell finds you before you even open your eyes. It comes through the thin wall of the attic room you share with 3 other people, up through the floorboards, through the thin cotton of the blanket that's pulled up over your nose, and it does not ask permission. It's meat. Specifically, it's meat that is not quite fresh, sitting in a mixture of fat and stock and something else, something browned and savoury and aggressive, been heated on a stove 2 floors below you, and underneath that, older, earthier, the smell of coal smoke and damp wool and the accumulated breath of 4 people in a room about the size of a modern-day bathroom, and underneath all of it the bass note of London itself, the thing that never leaves, the thing that gets into your coat and your hair and your skin within 2 days of arriving in this city and never quite comes out again. Sewage, coal, river mud, and something else, something sharp and animal and ancient that you've stopped trying to name. Welcome to Clerkenwell, London, in the spring of 1851. Your name is Ned Hawkins. You're 17 years old, and you've been in this city for 8 months, and in those 8 months you've learned things about yourself and about human civilization that nobody prepared you for and that you're not entirely sure how to carry. You arrive from Hertfordshire, about 20 miles north, which in 1851 might as well be the moon, with a small bundle of clothes, a letter of introduction from your father's cousin who knew a man, and the absolute conviction that London was a place where things happened. Big things, important things. You weren't wrong, but the things that are happening to you specifically are smaller and louder and more physically demanding than the things you imagined. You imagined commerce. You imagined meeting interesting people and perhaps one day owning something. You imagined advancement. What you got was Thomas Crick. Thomas Crick is not the future you imagined. He's a pie man. Not a baker who owns a shop, mind you. Not someone with a counter and an awning, and the comfortable respectability of being able to point to a door and say that door is mine. Thomas Crick sells pies from a tin can on the street. He has been doing this for 11 years. He has a pitch, the corner of a leather lane and Clerkenwell Road, which he guards with an intensity that a medieval lord might have brought to a castle. And he has a supplier, and he has roots and patterns and the accumulated hard knowledge of a man who has survived in one of the most cutthroat commercial environments on earth. He also has you. You are his assistant, which means you help carry, you help sell, you clean the cans at the end of the day, you run errands, and you receive in return a room in the same lodging house where Thomas and his wife live. 2 meals a day provided by Mrs. Crick, and 1 shilling and 6pence a week. That is not very much money. But it is money, and there's food, and nobody's hitting you. So by the standards of 1851 London, you are doing reasonably well. You've been doing this for 8 months, and this morning, like every morning, begins with the smell. The church bell from St. James nearby strikes 4 times. You don't need to count them anymore. Your body knows 4 o'clock the way a dog knows footsteps on the stair. You sit up. The blanket falls. The cold hits you immediately and completely, the way cold does in a room with no fire and a window that doesn't quite close properly. It's April, which in Hertfordshire you might have thought of as spring. But in this Clerkenwell attic, it means the frost has mostly stopped, but something deeply unpleasant has replaced it. A damp grey chill that sits in your lungs and in the joints of your fingers and makes the first hour of every day a sustained act of will. The 3 other people in the room are still asleep. There's Jack, who's a compositor at a printing house nearby, who works nights 3 days a week and days the other 4 and seems to survive on tea and stubbornness. There's Woman you know only as Mrs. P, who is a shirt finisher working for a wholesale clothier, and whose hands, when you've glimpsed them, look like a map of a place where very bad things happened. And there's a boy who might be 12 or might be 9, genuinely impossible to tell, who says his name is Charlie and hasn't yet explained what he does during the day, and whom you've decided not to ask about. You pull on your clothes in the dark, a rough shirt, thick trousers, stiff with old grease and dried mud. Your boots. The boots are important. Good boots are a survival tool in this city. Bad boots mean wet feet, mean blisters, mean infection, means the kind of spiralling disaster that takes people out of the labour market entirely. Your boots are not good exactly, but they are functional, and you oil them every Sunday the way Thomas showed you, and they have not let you down yet. Over everything, a heavy wool coat that was second-hand when you bought it for 4pence at a rag fair 6 months ago, and which has been further modified by time and work into something that is essentially a different object entirely. It smells of everything you've done while wearing it. You leave the room quietly. The stairs creak. You know which ones. Down 2 flights, through the narrow corridor, into the back room where Mrs. Crick is already up. Because Mrs. Crick is always already up. Because in this household the night is merely a brief interruption between one working day and the next. Margaret Crick is 43 years old, though she looks more and less than that simultaneously, more in her hands, which are rough and quick and know things about hard work that take decades to learn, less in her eyes, which are bright and sharp and miss nothing. She makes the pies. This is the centre of everything, the axis around which the entire Crick household revolves. The pies. Every evening from about 7 o'clock she starts, and every morning from 4 she finishes. The gap between those two endpoints is filled with pastry and meat and a coal-fire stove that heats the back kitchen to a temperature that in winter is the only warm place in the building. The pastry is hot water pastry, flour and lard and boiling water, mixed and worked until it comes together into something thick and pale and practical. Nothing delicate about it. It is not the kind of pastry you admire. It is the kind of pastry that does a job. It holds the filling in. It survives being carried in a tin can. It can be eaten in the street with one hand while doing something else with the other. That is its entire purpose, and it fulfills that purpose admirably. The filling is the part you've learned not to think about too carefully. It's meat. That much is certain. It goes into the pies as something brown and dense mixed with pepper and salt and a quantity of onion that at 4 o'clock in the morning turns the kitchen into an experience that makes your eyes water from the doorway. You know it's meat. And you know it's not always the same meat, and you know that on the days when Thomas comes back from the market with a particularly good price, the days when he looks almost pleased, which is as close to pleased as Thomas gets, those are the days when you choose not to ask any questions about what exactly produced that particularly good price. "Morning," Mrs. Crick says without looking up. "Morning." She's pressing lids onto the last tray of pies, the pastry edges crimped with a practised motion of her thumb and first finger that she's done so many thousands of times it's become a reflex, like breathing. Her knuckles are red from the heat of the dough and the cold of the room. There's a streak of flour across her left cheek that she either doesn't know about or has decided doesn't matter, which is probably the right decision. "Thomas is already at the stand," she says. "I need you to take the second batch when they're out of the oven. 20 minutes. 20 minutes. You sit on the wooden stool beside the stove and accept the mug of tea she's pushed toward you without ceremony. It's hot and strong and brown and tastes of nothing specific, which is exactly what tea tastes like when you make it in a kitchen that smells of everything else. But the heat of it travels from your hands to your chest, and something in you unclenches very slightly. "How many?" you ask. 83. 83 pies, at a penny each on a good day. On a bad day, 3p for 3, if the trade is slow and Thomas decides to move the stock rather than carry the unsolds back home. Because you don't carry unsolds back home if you can possibly help it. Unsolds become tomorrow's filling if nothing else presents itself. This is also something you've learnt not to think about too carefully. The oven is a heavy cast-iron range that Thomas bought second-hand from a publican who was going out of business, and which dominates one entire wall of the back kitchen. It burns coal. Everything in 1851 London burns coal. The entire city runs on coal the way a modern city runs on electricity, invisibly, constantly in the background of every action and smell and breath. The coal smoke and the meat smell and the onion smell and the pastry smell layer over each other in the close air of the kitchen. It coats your throat. By the time you've been here an hour, you carry it on you the way a baker carries flour. The pies come out of the oven in a long tray, their crusts golden brown, their tops vented with two small holes that let out a breath of steam when you tilt the tray. They look genuinely good. Mrs. Crick knows what she's doing. Whatever's inside them, they look good. Careful with the third row, she says. The crust on the N1 went a bit soft. Give that one to the first person who doesn't look at it too closely. The tin can is about the size of a small barrel, constructed from sheet metal with a lid that locks and a handle for carrying. Inside, lined with heavy cloth to retain heat, the pies sit in rows, snug against each other, losing their heat slowly in the spring air. You carry the can on your back with a leather strap across your chest. 83 pies. That's maybe 15 pounds of weight, more with the can itself, and you carry it the third of a mile from the lodging house to the corner of Leather Lane because that's what you do. Your back knows the weight. Your shoulders have adapted to it over 8 months. There's a specific ache that lives in the junction between your right shoulder blade and your spine that you've started to think of as a friend, in the way that you think of all permanent discomforts eventually. Not as pain exactly, but as information. A reminder that you are here, that you exist, that your body is doing a job. The streets at 4 in the morning are not empty. This is something that surprises people who think of cities as places that sleep. This city does not sleep. Not this part of it. Not in 1851. Not ever. Leather Lane is already moving. Not with the full roaring chaos of the daytime. That's still 2 hours away. But with the early trade. The people who start before everything else. The workers whose jobs exist precisely because the rest of the city is still asleep. A milk cart rounds the corner from Hatton Garden, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air, the metal churns rattling against each other with a hollow musical clank that echoes off the buildings. The driver doesn't look at you. You don't look at him. This is the etiquette of 4 in the morning. Nobody has the energy yet for eye contact. From somewhere further along the street, the sound of a broom on cobblestones. A crossing sweeper, clearing the filth from the intersection before the morning foot traffic begins. This is work that will earn him maybe 3p over the course of the day if the people crossing his patch are generous, which they mostly aren't. He's a boy, probably. The crossing sweepers are almost always boys, and then, ahead, the orange glow of Thomas's lantern. Thomas Crick is a man who looks like he was assembled from leftover parts, and then had 20 years of hard work applied to the result. He's 51, medium height, and built like something load-bearing. His hands are enormous, broader than you'd expect for a man who works with food, though if you think about it, the work is not delicate. He has a grey beard that he trims every Sunday and lets go the rest of the week, and eyes that are a pale, watery blue, and which have the particular quality of eyes that have seen everything they expect to see and have been proven right. He stands at his corner the way a post stands, settled, not going anywhere. He's got the warming can set up already, a cylindrical container of hot water that the pies sit above, keeping them warm through a principle of steam that Thomas couldn't explain but has mastered by instinct over a decade. The arrangement gives off a faint but definite warmth that, on cold mornings, draws people toward it the way moths go toward a candle. He looks up as you arrive and makes a sound that is his version of a greeting. You unload the morning's pies into the warming can, transferring them carefully from the carrying tin, feeling the heat through the cloth of your work gloves. The pastry is firm and slightly yielding, the way good pastry should be. They smell, genuinely, wonderful. 93 for yesterday, Thomas says. This is also a greeting of a kind. Yesterday's number, the baseline against which today will be measured. She sent 83 today. He makes a different sound. Calculation. Wednesday. Should be good. He adjusts the position of one pie in the can with the kind of precision that would seem comical if you didn't know by now that it matters. He's been refining this arrangement for 11 years. He knows exactly how the heat moves, which pies cool first, where the blind spots are. The men from the leatherworks come through from 5:30, then the clerks at 7. You'll work the lane, I'll do the Clerkenwell roadside. Right. And if anyone asks about the filling today, I know. It's beef. I know. You know. 5:30 comes, and with it the leather workers. There are perhaps 60 men who work at the leather dressing yard 3 streets away, and they come through this corner in a loose staggered procession between 5:30 and 6, and they are among the most reliably hungry people you have ever encountered. They work 12-hour shifts in a building that smells, and this is an objective fact that you verified the one time you went near the place, like the inside of an animal. They handle hides in various stages of processing that involve soaking them in vats of oak bark extract and lime and urine, and things you couldn't identify and don't want to. Their hands are perpetually stained a reddish brown that goes into the cracks of their skin and doesn't come out. They want food before they go in. They want it hot, and they want it now. Pie? The first man is broad, maybe 40, with the rolling walk of someone whose back has been complaining for years and has been instructed to keep quiet about it. He flips a penny onto the wooden board of the stall with the automatic accuracy of a man who's done this 10,000 times. You take the penny, you hand over the pie, and here is where the theatre of it begins. Because in 1851 London, the penny pie is not just a transaction, it's a relationship. Thomas has been standing on this corner for 11 years, and the leather workers have been buying from him for most of that, and there is a complex social architecture to this corner that takes a newcomer months to understand. The regulars don't say please, they don't say thank you necessarily, but they come back. Every single morning they come back, and in their way, they trust Thomas completely with the most basic human thing, the food that goes into their bodies to power their day. That trust is not stated, it's demonstrated by the fact that they're here. Morning, Crick. Morning, Bennett. You look terrible. Wife kept me up. Tell her from me that's no way to treat a man. Bennett takes the pie and bites into it as he walks, still moving, the crust crackling under his teeth. He doesn't break stride. He's eating and walking simultaneously, the way you eat when the meal is not an event but a refueling stop, when food is just the thing you do between one bout of work and the next. And this, right here, this is the essential difference between Victorian fast food and a Victorian sit-down meal. A sit-down meal is for people who have time, who have a table and a chair and the comfortable assumption that the world will wait while they eat. Street food is for everyone else, and in 1851 London, everyone else is the majority. Here's what most people don't know about Victorian London, and what I find genuinely astonishing the more I think about it. The majority of working-class people in London in 1851 had no kitchen. Not a bad kitchen. Not an inconvenient kitchen. No kitchen. At all. They lived in single rooms, in lodging houses that packed 8 or 12 or 20 people onto one floor, sharing a fireplace in a common room if they were lucky, sharing nothing if they weren't. They lived in cellars. Real cellars, below street level, where the damp came up through the earthen floor, and the light came in through a grating in the pavement above, and the air was whatever was left over after everyone else had used it. They lived in the back buildings, the courts, the alleys, the warrens of construction that had grown up behind and between the main streets as London expanded far faster than any plan could accommodate. In 1851, London has about 2.5 million people. In 1800, it had under 1 million. That's more than 2.5 times the population in 50 years. Think about what that means in physical terms. The city is consuming people from the countryside and from Ireland and from everywhere else, and pressing them into spaces that were not designed for them, that no one designed for anyone, that simply accreted organically around the need for cheap space close to work. And in those spaces you don't cook. You can't cook. You have no oven. You have no reliable fuel. You might have access to a fireplace you share with 4 other families, but that's for heat, not for cooking, and the coal costs money you might not have. And even if you had a fireplace and coal and a pot and the ingredients, when would you cook? You work 12 hours. You come home in the dark. What exactly is the meal you're preparing? So you buy it. You buy it on the street from the hundreds, the literal hundreds, of men and women and children who sell cooked food from the pavements and corners and alleyways of London. A man named Henry Mayhew, real person, spent years in the 1840s and early 1850s interviewing London street people and writing it all down, estimated that there were somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 street food sellers in London at mid-century. 6,000 to 8,000, and they fed a city. Pie, the cry carries. That's the point of it. Thomas has a particular way of calling it, one syllable, rising slightly at the end, not too loud, not too soft, the volume calibrated to reach the people on the opposite pavement, without disturbing the people directly in front of him, who are already buying. He's been doing it so long it's like a musical instrument. You've been learning. Your pie sounds still slightly wrong, a little too eager, too loud in the wrong moments, too quiet in others. Thomas has told you 3 times that it needs to come from here, and he gestured at his chest, not his throat, and you're working on it. By 6 o'clock the morning rush is in full force. Clerkenwell in 1851 is one of the most densely working-class areas in London, which is saying a great deal, because London in 1851 is substantially a working-class city. This is the centre of the clockmaking trade. There are dozens of tiny workshops within a quarter mile of this corner where men and women spend their days making the small, precise components of clocks and watches that are then assembled and sold as luxury goods. The workers who make them are not paid luxury goods wages. There are printing houses, leather works, a brewery, 3 different workshops doing some variety of metal work, a bone-crushing yard. Yes, exactly what it sounds like. And no, you don't want to be downwind. That makes glue and fertilizer. All of these workers pass through Clerkenwell Road in the morning, and all of them are hungry. And most of them can afford just about 1 penny. 1 penny for a pie. 1 penny that represents in many cases roughly 1/3 of their daily food budget. A labouring man in 1851 London earns perhaps 10 to 12 shillings a week if he's skilled, less if he isn't. Out of that he pays rent, 2 or 3 shillings for a room, more for a room worth having, coal, clothes, and food. Food for himself and quite possibly a wife and children. The mathematics are brutal. They don't leave much room, and so you buy cheap, you buy filling, and you buy it ready-made because you have no way to make it yourself. The pie for 1 penny is one of the best deals on offer, but it's not the only deal, because the Victorian street food market is not just pies, and if you think of it that way, you're missing something extraordinary. In 1851 London, within a short walk of Thomas's pitch, you can buy hot potatoes, The baked potato sellers are a fixture of London winters, their cans giving off a warmth that acts as both advertisement and comfort. A large potato, floury and hot, 1 penny. The sellers buy their potatoes wholesale from the markets and cook them in cans heated by charcoal, and a good seller at a busy pitch in the evening might sell 200 potatoes in a night. The potato sellers are particularly popular near theatres and gin shops, where people emerge wanting something to absorb what they've consumed. Eel. Eels are the great poverty food of Victorian London, and this is something modern people find slightly baffling until you understand the geography. The Thames and its tributaries in the mid-19th century are absolutely teeming with eels. They come in from the sea, they live in the river, and they can be caught and sold for almost nothing. Stewed eels from a street stall, a cup of gelatinous savoury liquid with slices of pale eel meat swimming in it, can be bought for a halfpenny. A halfpenny. Half of 1 penny. The eel sellers carry their product in shallow white basins and have their own particular cry. Stewed eels, penny halfpenny, stewed eels. It becomes a kind of rhythm after a while, part of the sound of the city. Oysters. The modern conception of oysters as an expensive luxury is a recent phenomenon. In 1851, oysters are poor people's food. They come in on the tide and by boat from the Thames estuary, and they are consumed in quantities that modern London shellfish lovers would find difficult to comprehend. A shilling buys you a dozen, and many sellers go lower than that. The oyster sellers set up at the intersections and outside the pub doors with their barrels and their shucking knives, and the people who pass them are not the silk-coated merchants you might imagine, but the workers, the dockers, the factory hands, the servant girls on their afternoon off. Oysters are what you eat when you want protein and you haven't got much money and you're standing in the street. Coffee. The coffee stall men are out before anyone else. Before even Thomas, because the people who want coffee at 4 a.m. are the all-night workers, the porters, the costermongers going to market, the night watchmen coming off their shifts, the women who've been working the later streets and need something to warm themselves before they go home. Coffee from a street stall in 1851 is not, it should be said, coffee in any sense you'd currently recognise. It's a hot brown liquid with milk and sugar in it, and the coffee element is variable and sometimes consists mainly of chicory or roasted grain or whatever the stallman has decided is coffee today. But it's hot and it's sweet, and it costs a halfpenny or a penny, and in the dark and the cold it is as necessary as breathing. Sheep's trotters and cow heel. You haven't tried these yet. You've watched people eat them. The trotter seller carries his product in a wooden tray, the cooked feet sold individually for a halfpenny apiece, and people stand there and eat them with their hands, gnawing the gelatinous meat from the small bones with a complete absence of self-consciousness, because self-consciousness requires a kind of security that this particular life doesn't often provide. And pies, always, always pies. The morning wears on. By 7, the clerks are coming through, a different category of humanity than the leather workers, better dressed, moving with the particular anxious hurry of men who are hourly employees in offices where the clocking in procedure is precise and the penalties for lateness are real. They want their pie quickly and with slightly less conversation. They're the ones who make a point of not making eye contact while they pay, of performing the transaction with an efficient briskness that implies they have places to be and people to be seen by. Most of them are actually not much better off than the leather workers. A junior clerk in 1851 might earn 12 or 14 shillings a week, which is similar to or slightly above a skilled manual worker, but the clerk has to dress the part and live somewhere respectable and keep up appearances that cost money. He is, in many ways, trapped between two worlds, not poor enough to abandon the pretense of gentility, not rich enough to actually achieve it. But he buys the pie the same as anyone else. He just eats it faster and with more apparent embarrassment. "Tuppence," one of them says, pushing a coin across the board. You start to reach for 2 pies. "No, just the one. I don't have change." You look at Thomas. Thomas has already opened a small tin box, the change reserve, which he counts out every morning to the exact penny before they start, and produced a copper. "There," Thomas says, and his voice has precisely the weight required. Professional, not unkind, but not accommodating either. A penny is a penny. We do not round up for anyone. The clerk takes his change and his pie and moves on quickly, as if the transaction itself is something he wants to leave behind. Thomas watches him go. The pale blue eyes track him without expression. "He'll be back tomorrow," Thomas says. He's right. He's almost always right about these things. You eat your own breakfast at 7:30 during a brief lull. This is the part of the morning where the early rush has died and the midday rush hasn't yet begun, and the two of you have a few minutes to breathe. Thomas produces bread and dripping from the canvas bag he carries. Thick slices of bread spread with the fat drippings saved from the cooking, seasoned with the caramelized meat juice from the bottom of the dripping bowl. It's brown and slightly salty, and it coats the inside of your mouth with something that is caloric and warming and absolutely relentlessly practical. No elegance to it, no ceremony. You lean against the wall behind the pitch and eat standing up, watching the street. Because even during the lull, Thomas keeps one eye on the trade. Always one eye on the trade. What's the great exhibition exactly, you ask? You've been seeing posters, signs, a general atmosphere of something significant happening nearby that you haven't quite been allowed to access. Thomas chews, considers whether this question is worth the energy of a full answer. "Big glass building in Hyde Park," he says. "Prince Albert's idea. Show off everything British. Factory goods, machines, inventions. Show the foreigners what we can do. Have you seen it? No? Are you going to?" The pause is longer this time. "6pence to get in on cheap days," Thomas says. "Shilling most days. 3 shillings on the good days." He doesn't need to say anything more. 6pence is roughly a third of a day's trade profit. 3 shillings is more than most of his customers earn in a day of hard labour. The Great Exhibition of 1851, the Crystal Palace, 600,000 square feet of glass and iron, filled with 14,000 exhibitors from around the world, the most spectacular display of industrial and commercial achievement the world has ever seen, visited by 6 million people over its 6-month run, is, in many ways, not for the people of Clerkenwell. There are cheap days on Mondays, you say. There are. And Tuesdays. There are. A pause. Thomas finishes his bread and brushes the crumbs from his coat. "The men who built that building," he says, "ate their lunch from stalls like this one. I know, because I had a pitch near the Hyde Park corner the whole time they were building it. 200 workmen, 5 days a week for 8 months. He picks up his position behind the warming can and adjusts one pie. Made good money that spring, he says. Good money. This is something I want to stay with for a moment because it matters. The Great Exhibition, this extraordinary monument to British industrial achievement, this symbol of progress and empire and the triumph of modern civilization, was built by men who ate meat pies on the pavement, literally. That is not a metaphor. The workers who bent the iron and fitted the glass and laid the floors of the Crystal Palace were, most of them, working men from exactly the class you're currently standing in. They lived in lodging houses in Paddington and Kensington and Pimlico and Clerkenwell. They couldn't cook. They couldn't afford to. They ate from stalls and from barrows and from the tin cans of men like Thomas. And on payday they may be afforded a hot meal at a cheap eating house, and the rest of the time they ate standing up, one-handed in the street. The enormous, glittering monument to human achievement was built by people who couldn't get in to see it once it was done. Shilling admission. 3 shillings on special days. 6 million visitors over 6 months. The majority of them from the comfortable classes, from the sort of homes where kitchens exist and the question of where the next meal is coming from is not a constant low-level anxiety. The men who built it went back to their patches and their pitches and their factories the day it opened, and they bought a pie on the way. By 9 o'clock the pitch is quieter and your feet are telling you about it. The standing is the thing nobody tells you about. You stand for 12 hours a day, on cobblestones, in boots that are functional but not designed for long-term comfort, on a body that is 17 years old and resilient but not invulnerable. By mid-morning, there's a specific ache in the arches of both feet that you've learned to read like weather. By noon it will have moved up to your calves. By the time the stall closes in the evening, your lower back will have opinions about the day that it will share with you in detail. You have learned to shift your weight, to rock slightly, heel to toe, to find positions against the wall behind the stall that look like leaning and feel like brief relief. Thomas stands perfectly upright the entire time. 11 years. His body has adapted in ways that yours hasn't yet. You're going to the market, Thomas says. It's not a question. The market. Smithfield. If you know London history, you know Smithfield. If you don't, let me tell you something about it that will not leave your head once you know it. Smithfield Meat Market in 1851 is not a hygienic indoor facility with refrigeration and food safety standards and men in white coats checking things with thermometers. Smithfield in 1851 is a living, breathing, roaring, bleeding cattle market in the middle of the city, less than half a mile from where you're standing, where somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 cattle and more than 30,000 sheep are bought and sold every single week. Every Monday and every Friday, the cattle walk to Smithfield. They walk in from the countryside driven by drovers, through the streets of the city, through Islington, through Pentonville, down the city road, through the streets of Clerkenwell, right past this corner. And as they come through, 2, 3, 400 animals being driven by men with sticks through narrow streets filled with people and carts and horses, the results are exactly what you'd expect. By Monday evening, the streets of Clerkenwell have been through something. The smell persists until Thursday, sometimes longer. And Smithfield itself on market day there is no word for it that doesn't undersell it. It's approximately 3 acres of open ground that becomes twice a week something between a battlefield and a barnyard. The animals push and surge and bellow. The drovers curse and hit. The buyers and sellers shout over each other in a language of livestock prices that takes years to learn. Blood runs in the gutters. Literally, this is not a metaphor. The gutters run red, from animals that are slaughtered nearby and from injuries sustained in the chaos of the market itself. Charles Dickens wrote about Smithfield in Oliver Twist. The ground was covered nearly ankle deep with filth and mire, and a thick steam, perpetually rising from the reeking bodies of the cattle and mingling with the fog which seemed to rest upon the chimney tops, hung heavily above. Dickens was not exaggerating. Smithfield in 1851 is in the process of being reformed. There are campaigns, there have been for years, to move the live cattle market out of the city, because the nuisance and the cruelty and the public health implications are becoming impossible to ignore. The covered meat market, for carcasses for cut meat, will be built just north of here, and the live market will eventually move out to Islington. But that's the future. Right now, in 1851, Smithfield is still Smithfield, and Thomas sends you there twice a week to buy. The errand is this. You take the canvas bag and the money, the exact amount Thomas has calculated, not a penny more, and you go to Smithfield and you buy the week's supply of meat from one of the dealers in the surrounding area. Not from the market itself exactly, from the network of small butchers and middlemen that orbit around the market like planets around a particularly violent sun. Thomas has a supplier. His name is Pratt. He operates from a premises on Cowcross Street that consists of a wooden counter, a back room, and a smell that begins about 30 yards before you reach the door and doesn't fully leave you for the rest of the day. Pratt is a short man with arms that look like they were designed for a much larger person, forearms thick with muscle from a lifetime of heavy cutting work. He always has blood on his apron. Always. Even first thing in the morning when you'd think there hadn't yet been time for blood, he has blood on his apron. You have decided this is actually some kind of naturally occurring feature of him, like eye colour. The negotiation between Thomas and Pratt, conducted in your presence but mostly over your head, is one of the most compressed and information-dense things you've ever witnessed. It involves gestures toward the hanging carcasses, a brief examination of colour and texture that means nothing to you and everything to them, a price stated by Pratt, a counter price muttered by Thomas, a silence, another counter, and then the transaction. What you buy from Pratt is not labelled. Let's be precise about this. In 1851, there is no requirement to label meat. There are no laws specifying that the meat in a pie must be the meat stated on the... There is no sign. There is no stated ingredient. There is a pie, and in the pie there is meat, and the meat is meat. Mayhew, in his great survey of London street life, talked to pie sellers at length. They told him, some pies had mutton, many had beef, some had whatever was available. The cat and dog population of Victorian London served in extremis a supplementary role in the meat supply chain that nobody was proud of but nobody was entirely surprised by. This is the part you don't think about. This is the part where you've made a kind of pragmatic peace with the world as it is. The pies are hot. They taste good. Mrs. Crick makes them with care and skill. The people who buy them are not people who can afford to ask questions that might make the answer expensive. This is how it works. But the real secret of the Victorian street food economy, and this is what I find genuinely extraordinary when you look at the whole picture, isn't the questionable ingredients. That's not the story. The story is the ingenuity. The story is that a city of 2.5 million people, most of them poor, most of them without kitchens, most of them working hours that left no time for preparation, was fed every single day. Not by institutions or charities or government programs, though those things existed in their limited way, by individuals, by men and women who got up at 3 or 4 in the morning, who carried heavy cans through the streets, who stood for 12 hours on cobblestones and called their wares until their voices went rough, and who provided, for 1 penny, for a halfpenny, the thing that people needed to survive the day. That's the real story of Victorian fast food. It's not hygiene and it's not luxury. It's ingenuity in the face of absolute necessity. And there's a whole vast ecosystem of it that extends far beyond Thomas's Corner, far beyond pies. Let me take you into that ecosystem, because once you start looking, it's everywhere. The coffee stall on the corner of Farringdon Road is already in its afternoon position when you pass it on your way back from Pratt's. It's a wooden cart with a boiler mounted on it, the whole thing heated by a small charcoal brazier underneath. The boiler is copper, dented and smoke-stained, and it makes a low, constant sound that isn't quite a hiss and isn't quite a rattle but is somewhere between them. A sound that, on a grey April morning, carries a particular comfort. The man behind it is maybe 60, with white hair and the careful manner of someone who's been dealing with the public for a very long time and has achieved a state of perfect professional equanimity. You stop. You have a few minutes and you're cold despite the coat. "Coffee," you say, and put down your halfpenny. He draws the liquid from the boiler, brown, milky, sweetened hot, into a thick pottery mug and passes it to you. You hold the mug with both hands and let the warmth travel up into your fingers, which have been carrying the canvas bag for half a mile and are making their opinion known. The coffee is not coffee. You've established this, but it is hot and sweet, and it has something in it. Roasted chicory mostly, you think, that provides the illusion of stimulation, and right now the illusion is enough. Around you, the street is getting busy. It's mid-morning, and Farringdon Road is one of the main arteries of this part of London, and the flow of people through it has the quality of a river that doesn't vary much. Always moving, always in both directions, always with the particular intensity of people who have somewhere to be and a specific reason for getting there. "You work for Crick," the coffee man says. It startles you slightly. "Yes." "Good lad." He's already drawing the next mug. His wife makes a decent pie. She does. "Tell her from me, the ones she sends on Mondays, the ones with the extra pepper. Those are the ones people ask about. You'll tell her." This too is something you've learned about the street food world. It's a community. These sellers know each other, compete with each other, occasionally help each other out, and collectively form a kind of intelligence network about what works and what doesn't, which pitches are good, which suppliers are honest, which products move and which ones don't. They don't have newspapers or business journals or market research companies. They have conversation. They have the accumulated knowledge of years of standing in the same place and watching people choose. Thomas has been on his corner for 11 years. He knows more about the dietary preferences, the pay cycles, the mood patterns, and the economic pressures of the people of Clerkenwell than anyone in any office in the city. He's never written any of it down. It lives in his head, in his body, in the pale blue eyes that watch people and see the things they are not saying. The question of where you eat, when you're poor in London in 1851, is really a question of where you can eat. And the options are more varied than you might expect. There are the street sellers, which we've been talking about, but there are also, for those who have a few pennies more, for those who want to sit down and be indoors and be treated like human beings for the duration of a meal, the cheap eating houses. They exist in the courts and side streets, in basements and back rooms, in premises that announce themselves with a few words chalked on a board or a handwritten sign in the window. Good plain dinners or cheap fare or the simple and entirely accurate hot food. Inside they are always hot. The cooking fire makes them hot. The bodies of the people eaten make them hot. The steam from the pots makes them hot. And the heat is part of what you're paying for. To sit in warmth and eat something cooked this morning. For 3p, in one of these establishments you can get a plate of boiled beef and vegetables, or a helping of soup, real soup, thick with whatever was on hand, which might be peas or barley or scraps of meat, and a slice of bread, or a plate of eel and mash. The boiled eels ladled over mashed potato and covered in the parsley green liquor that is a specific, peculiar genius of the East End of London. Eel, mash, and liquor. If you haven't encountered this, let me explain it, because it's important. Pie and mash shops, which still exist in London today, a few of them, a handful of survivors in the East End, began precisely because of this hunger, because of the need to feed poor people hot food for small money. An eel pie and mash with liquor cost 2p or 3p in the 1850s. The eel is caught in the Thames. The potato is the cheapest staple food available. The liquor, which is not alcoholic, the name is from an older usage meaning liquid, is the water the eels were cooked in, turned green with parsley, tart with vinegar. It is genuinely strange. It tastes of the river and of herbs and of something else, something particular to it, and people who grow up on it develop a loyalty to it that is as strong as any nostalgia. The eel shops are tiled in white, or will be, as the decades go by and the style solidifies. White tiles because they look clean, because they can be washed down, because cleanliness is an aspiration even when the ingredients are river eels and questionable mash. You haven't been to an eel shop yet. You've been meaning to. Thomas mentions them occasionally with the tone of a man acknowledging a rival's competence. On Thursdays, something different happens. On Thursdays, Thomas gives you the afternoon. Not entirely free. There are still the cans to clean, the next day's supply run to organise. But the pitch closes at midday on Thursdays because Thomas has a long-standing arrangement with his wife, involving an afternoon visit to her mother in Islington, and the stall doesn't run without both of them. This particular Thursday is the first warm afternoon of the year. The sky has decided, finally after months of grey, to be blue. The sun is making a genuine effort. The streets look different when it's like this, less oppressive, the grime somehow less overwhelming, the people in them something other than grey. You finish the can cleaning by noon, and then you walk. You walk south, because south is where you haven't been, and you walk with the specific directionless freedom of a person who has, for once, no task, no bag to carry, no penny to collect, no pie to hand over. You cross into the city. The dense, ancient square mile that is the commercial heart of London. The banks, the exchanges, the offices, the counting houses. The streets are narrower here and the buildings older, some of them going back to before the Great Fire of 1666. The ones that survived at the edges, the ones that caught nothing but survived through luck and solid brick. Most of what you see was built afterward, in the late 17th century, as London rebuilt itself with unusual speed on the plans of a dozen different architects working simultaneously. The smells here are different than Clerkenwell. Less animal, more financial. Ink and paper and the particular ozone smell of metal being counted. Coal smoke everywhere, as always. But the meat and tanning smell of the working districts is gone, replaced by something drier, more formal. And then, before you quite intend it, you're at the river. The Thames in 1851 is not the river a Londoner knows today. The Thames of 2024, the cleaned, managed, ecologically recovering river, is a different creature entirely from the river you're looking at right now. The Thames of 1851 is, to be direct about it, a sewer. This is not a metaphor. The river receives directly the sewage of 2.5 million people. There are no sewers in London, not in the modern sense. The Great Sewer Building Programme by Joseph Bazalgette that will transform the city's sanitation doesn't begin for another 5 years. Right now, in 1851, what comes out of the privies and the cesspits of London's lodging houses and tenements goes into the earth, and eventually, one way or another, into the river. The river receives the runoff from Smithfield Market, with all that implies. The river receives the overflow from hundreds of industrial processes, tanning yards, glue factories, breweries, gasworks. The river receives everything, and yet, and this is the thing that makes your head hurt slightly, the river also provides food, fish, eels, oysters from the estuary, shrimp from the lower reaches, watercress from the tributaries to the west. People eat things that come out of this water. You're standing on Blackfriars Bridge looking down at it. The colour today, in the spring afternoon, light, is a murky brown-green, and the smell reaches you even here, even with the breeze off the water. Not terrible today, because the weather is cool enough. In summer, the smell becomes something else, something that can be smelled from the other side of the city, a smell that will, in 1858, be significant enough to close Parliament. That's 7 years from now. The great stink of 1858, when the Thames smell becomes so severe that the drapes of the House of Commons are soaked in chloride of lime in an attempt to make the chamber habitable. It doesn't work. Parliament rises early. But even now, in April of 1851, on a cool day, the smell of the Thames is present, persistent. The eels live in it. The eels come in from the sea every autumn in huge numbers. Young eels, elvers, making their way upriver from the Atlantic in one of the great strange migrations of the natural world. They're small enough to get through anything, past any obstacle into any water. They come up the Thames and its tributaries in numbers that the fishermen of this era can barely process. They grow in the river. They live in the river. And then every eel that makes it to adulthood swims back out to the Sargasso Sea to spawn. The ones that don't make it back out first become the penny bowl at the street stall. For a halfpenny, a worker can buy a cup of stewed eel. For twopence, a full serving at one of the eel and mash shops. The eel, in the 1851 London diet of the working class, is not a delicacy. It's a staple. It's protein. It's the river feeding the city. You look at the water. Then you look up. The view from the middle of Blackfriars Bridge is one of the things people don't tell you about London until you've seen it yourself. Because what you see when you stand in the middle of this bridge and look upriver toward the city, what you see on this particular April afternoon, is something that will be, when you're old, one of the images you carry in your head as a memory of this time and this place. St. Paul's Cathedral. It rises above the rooftops, above everything. The dome, which Wren finished in 1710, which is the dome that defines the London skyline in a way that is not decorative but structural, not ornamental but essential, the way a heart is essential. It rises above the smoke and the crowded buildings and the working cranes and the ship's masts of the river below. And in the afternoon light it does something extraordinary. It glows. The stone is Portland stone, white limestone from Dorset, brought up by sea and barge to build a new cathedral after the old one burned the Great Fire. And in afternoon light, Portland stone does this thing. It catches the sun and holds it and gives it back slightly warmer, slightly more golden than it arrived. From here, from the middle of Blackfriars Bridge, with the river sliding brown and heavy beneath your feet, and the smoke of the city hanging in horizontal layers in the air, the dome of St. Paul's rises above all of it, and is simply, quietly, enormous. You have seen it every day for 8 months. You have walked past it. You have navigated by it, used it as a fixed point in the disorienting maze of streets. You have seen it in fog and in rain, and in the grey November light that makes everything look like a photograph developed badly. But you have not stood here before, on this bridge, at this angle, at this particular hour. And something happens. The city shifts, just slightly. The thing that has been a machine, a grinding, demanding, occasionally beautiful machine that you've been operating inside of, becomes, for a moment, something else. Something that can be looked at, seen whole or nearly whole. 2.5 million people, all of them eating, all of them hungry, all of them finding ways, penny by penny, pie by pie, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, to get through the day. Thomas on his corner, Mrs. Crick in her kitchen at 4 a.m, pressing pie lids with the heel of her hand, the leather workers swallowing pies in 3 bites as they walk through the gate, the clerk who's too embarrassed to linger, the coffee man with his dented copper boiler, the eel sellers with their white basins, the baked potato men with their heat cans, the costermongers who'll be out tonight in the markets, buying the day's produce to sell tomorrow before it turns. All of them feeding it, the great machine, the city, this specific, actual, irreplaceable city in this specific year, with its specific problems and its specific ingenuities and its specific smell of everything that has ever lived and decayed and been turned into something useful. A pigeon lands on the bridge railing 6 inches from your left hand, regards you with one orange eye, decides you have nothing worth taking and leaves. You stand there for a while. The evening brings rain, not the dramatic thunderstorm kind, the English kind, the insidious grey, persistent kind that doesn't fall so much as accumulate, that appears to emerge from the air itself rather than descending from any particular cloud. The kind that's been going since just before you would have thought to bring an umbrella, if you owned an umbrella. You don't own an umbrella. By the time you reach Thomas's pitch at 5 to pack up the evening's remnants, 3 unsold pies, which Mrs. Crick will decide about in the morning, you are very specifically wet in the particular way that English rain achieves, not soaked through, not dramatically drenched, just damp everywhere, in every layer, in a way that will take hours to leave. Thomas is already there, the warming can strapped and ready to carry. 78, he says, sold, the day's count. You do the arithmetic. 78 pence, which is 6 shillings and 6pence, against which you have to subtract Pratt's meat, Mrs. Crick's flour and lard, the coal for the oven, the incidentals. The profit from a good day on this pitch is perhaps 2 shillings and 6pence. 3 on a very good day. Thomas has worked this pitch for 11 years. You do not do the full arithmetic on what that means for his accumulated savings, because you've done it before, and it makes you feel something complicated about the future. Good day, Thomas says. The way he says it, it means something between acceptable and could have been worse. You lift the carrying tin onto your back. The cobblestones are slick with rain. The gas lamp on the corner has just been lit by the lamplighter, who does this stretch of leather lane every evening in a long, efficient walk, pole extended, touching flame to each lamp in a rhythm that makes the street brighten in sequence behind him like a slow wave. The lamplighter is 19, you think, maybe 20. You've never spoken to him. You've watched him do this walk several hundred times. He does it with a briskness that suggests he has other stretches to do before full dark, which he does. The lamplighters are paid by the number of lamps they maintain, and the best ones move quickly through their routes and take on extra territory when they can. He probably ate his supper at a street stall too. Everyone in this city feeds themselves from someone else's street stall. The eating house on Vine Street is a place you've been twice before, both times on Thursdays when Thomas gave you the afternoon and you found yourself, by evening, near enough to spend the tuppence. It's a basement, down 6 steps from street level, through a door that resists slightly at the bottom, the damp has warped the frame, into a room that is always warm, always loud, always somehow welcoming despite the sticky tables and the benches that have been worn smooth by decades of working bodies sitting and sitting again. It's run by a woman named Mrs. Flood, who is approximately as wide as she is tall, and who has the specific authority of a person who's been feeding hungry people in a small space for a long time, and has decided that the way to do this is not with gentleness. "What?" she says when you come down the steps. "Dinner?" 2 pence. 2 pennies on the table. She takes them with one hand and gestures toward the bench in the corner with the other. There are 8 people already seated, eating in various configurations of speed and satisfaction. The meal arrives in about 4 minutes. A broad, thick-lipped bowl of soup, pea and ham, or something that identifies as pea and ham, a thick green liquid with pieces of something floating in it, and a chunk of bread that is absolutely, defiantly stale, but is still bread, still caloric, still exactly what your body's asking for right now. You eat. The man across from you is a carpenter, you think. Sawdust in his hair, a specific smell of fresh-cut wood that cuts through the general atmosphere of the basement in a way that feels almost clean. He's eating his soup in silence with the concentration of a man who is using the meal as an opportunity to be completely not somewhere else for 10 minutes. The woman next to him is in some kind of finishing work, needle and thread probably, given the slight squint she directs at nothing in particular, the occupational hazard of years of fine work in poor light. Her hands around her spoon are slightly crooked at the second joint of each finger. These are the people who built London, not in the monument-making sense that gets written about, in the literal sense. The people who made the clothes, cut the wood, printed the books, ground the lenses, dressed the leather, processed the food, moved the goods. The people whose names are not on buildings and whose faces are not in portraits and whose lives are not in history books unless you specifically go looking. And what they ate, what made it possible for them to stand up and do this work again the next day, was largely this: the penny pie, the halfpenny eel, the twopenny bowl of soup, the warm potato held in cold hands, the cup of coffee that wasn't quite coffee but was hot and sweet and cost nothing much and was there, the street food. There's a story about food adulteration in Victorian England that I've been building toward, because you need to understand what this period actually involved. The Adulteration of Food and Drink Act doesn't pass until 1860. Before that, and it should be noted that before that means decades, there are no standards, no inspections, no requirements, no consequences for putting whatever you think will work into whatever you're selling. Bread is adulterated with alum, a chemical that makes the bread whiter and helps it rise, also a mild poison in quantity. Milk is diluted with water, and the water is often not clean water. Pepper is padded with ground floor sweepings. Tea is mixed with used tea leaves dried and resold, and also with copper compounds that restore the green colour to leaves that have already been steeped once. Coffee, already of dubious botanical origin on the street stalls, is mixed with chicory, with roasted grain, with ground dried carrot. Sugar is cut with chalk, and the meat in the pies. Mayhew, in his investigations, quotes pie sellers directly. One of them told him, and I'm paraphrasing here because Mayhew's Victorian prose is dense, that the meat used in street pies was very often what the trade called meat that had come to its natural end. Animals that had died of disease, or injury, or simply old age, rather than being slaughtered. Animals that the legitimate butchers wouldn't take because they weren't fit for proper sale. This is not, in the Victorian street food trade, considered fraud. It's considered resourcefulness. The meat is cooked, it's hot, it's seasoned. The pie crust around it is perfectly fine. And the people buying it are not unaware at some level that for 1 penny you're not getting the best cut of anything. They're buying the calories, they're buying the heat, they're buying the act of eating something hot in a city that would otherwise not feed them at all. You've known this at some level since you started working for Thomas. You've made your peace with it. You've found the place in your mind where the knowledge lives and put it behind a door and kept the door closed. But it's there. And sometimes, in the dark of the attic room, you think about the women who bite into the pies, and the men who eat them walking, and the children who are given a piece and eat it without question, and you wonder about the exact point at which survival requires you to not ask certain questions, and whether that point is here, or whether it was before you arrived, or whether it's somewhere ahead. You haven't found an answer yet. You're not sure there is one. On Sunday, the market comes to you. Or rather, you go to the market. Club Row and Petticoat Lane and the Borough Market south of the river. These are the Sunday markets, the ones that are technically illegal because of the Sunday trading laws, and which happen anyway because 2.5 million people do not stop being hungry on Sundays because Parliament prefers them to be in church. Thomas doesn't trade on Sundays. He is, in his particular way, a religious man. Not demonstrative, not pious in the church-going sense, but he has a line and the Sunday trading laws are on the other side of it. But he sends you to Petticoat Lane. There's a woman named Sutton who sells watercress on Sunday mornings, he says. She comes in from Hackney. The watercress is good. Buy me 3p worth. 3p of watercress, an errand, and then the market. Petticoat Lane is in Whitechapel, which is east of the city, which is a different London than the one you've been living in. Whitechapel in 1851 is denser, poorer, louder, and in some ways more alive than Clerkenwell. If alive is the word for a place where 10,000 people crowd into a street on Sunday morning to buy and sell and argue and eat, you smell it before you see it. Not just the food, though there's food everywhere. The whole market is a forest of smells working in combinations you can't quite separate. Hot chestnuts from a brazier at the entrance, saltfish, herring, pickled in barrels, a sharp oceanic smell that cuts through everything else like a knife. Boiling sugar from somewhere in the middle of the market where a man sells toffee from a tin. The particular heavy smell of old clothes, which make up a significant portion of the market's commerce. second-hand coats, shoes, with the soles not quite gone, hats that have lived other lives and carry the evidence, and underneath all of it, the people. Because Petticoat Lane on a Sunday morning in 1851 is one of the most various things you've ever been inside. Every kind of London is here. The Jewish population of the East End, large, settled, going back generations. The Ashkenazi communities who came from Germany and Poland and Russia, and who run much of the second-hand clothing trade and many of the food stalls. The Irish, who've been pouring into London since the famine that started in 1845 and who you see in the market in numbers. Large families, the children slightly pale, the adults with a particular watchfulness of people who know what it is to have nothing and are not going to be caught without something again. The costermongers' families, the hereditary street trading families who have their pitches and their roots and their internal social structure as complex as any guild. And the recently arrived, people like you from the countryside, people whose lives in their original places had become impossible and who came to London because London was the biggest thing available. All of them eating, all of them buying food with whatever they have. You find Sutton easily. Thomas's directions were exact, at the north end of the lane where the vegetable sellers cluster. She's a big woman in her 50s, the watercress arranged in bunches in a flat basket, each bunch dark green and wet, smelling of cold water and chalk streams and something clean that is almost shocking in this air. Watercress comes from the chalk streams of Hampshire and Hertfordshire and Bedfordshire, grown in the clear, cold, spring-fed water, harvested and brought to London overnight by cart and later by train. The watercress girls, there are hundreds of them, young women and girls who sell watercress from baskets door to door and at market, begin their rounds at dawn, and by mid-morning the watercress has gone from icy and crisp to slightly soft, and by afternoon it's gone entirely. Watercress is the breakfast of the very poor. A halfpenny buys a bunch large enough to eat with bread, and it is, nutritionally, one of the better options available to someone on minimal funds. Iron, vitamins, things the Victorian diet often lacks desperately. The watercress girl, not Sutton herself, but the young woman selling for her at the east side of her stall, is maybe 15, with hands reddened from the cold water, her fingers slightly numb, working quickly to make her bunches neat for display. 3pence of the good ones, you say. She wraps them in a piece of damp cloth. The watercress smells of limestone and running water, and somewhere that is not this city. You take them and put them in your bag, and then you walk into the market. The food in Petticoat Lane on Sunday morning is its own universe. There are, in no particular order, and within 100 feet of each other, a woman selling pickled herrings from a barrel. The herrings are dark and dense in the brine, a strong smell that announces itself 20 feet in advance. She sells them individually, a penny for a large one, and her customers stand at the barrel and eat them right there, holding the fish by the tail, the flesh coming away from the bones in strips that they eat quickly, standing, looking outward as they eat with the unconscious surveillance of people used to crowded places. A boy, maybe 10, with a tray of sheep's trotters. He carries the tray at shoulder height on a strap and calls for them in a voice that hasn't fully settled yet, the pitch wavering between a boy's high note and the deeper sound he's aiming for. Trotters are good for the poor, in the way that people don't think about. They're collagen-rich, they're filling, and they use the parts of the animal that the wealthy leave. Every part of the animal is used. In a world where nothing can be wasted, the feet are valuable. A stall with hot eels. The woman behind it has her barrel and her cutting board and her tin of liquor, that particular parsley green liquid, and she ladles it over the portions with a practised, generous hand. There's a queue. There's always a queue at the eel stall, a coffee can, working. The man with it moves through the crowd rather than staying in one place, calling his coffee and his baked goods, slices of something dense and dark sweetened with treacle, from a tray balanced on his other arm. He's been doing this walk since before you arrived, and will still be doing it when the market ends. And the pies, not Thomas's pies, someone else's. A young woman, maybe 20, with a warming can strapped to her front, selling from a pitch near the centre of the market. She's got a particular call, higher than Thomas's, almost a melody. She's doing well. You can see it in the way the can is emptying. You watch her for a moment. The transaction. Coin presented, coin taken, pie transferred, person moves on. Over and over, fast. The economy of it, the compression of it. No pleasantries, but no hostility. Just the exchange that keeps both parties going. On your way back through the market, someone calls your name. It takes you a moment to place him, and then you do. It's Charlie, the boy from your lodging house, the one whose age you can't determine and whose daytime activities you've decided not to inquire about. He's here in the market with 2 other boys of similar indefinite age, and he's holding something wrapped in paper. Pie, he says, waving the wrapped object. Not hungry. It's good. Got it for a halfpenny. A halfpenny pie. You know what that means, nutritionally, in terms of ingredient quality. But Charlie eats it with complete satisfaction, biting through the crust into whatever is inside, not pausing to identify it, not asking for specification. And here is the thing that I keep coming back to. Charlie is fed. That seems like a low bar. It is a low bar. But consider the city around you, the tens of thousands of people who are not adequately fed, who are too far below even this level of street food availability to access even the halfpenny option. The workhouse inmates on their gruel, the street sleepers who survive on whatever can be begged or found, the people whose situation is genuinely desperate in ways that make the lodging house attic seem comfortable. Charlie has a halfpenny. He found it, earned it, begged it. It doesn't matter. He has it, and there is a pie for a halfpenny in this market, and he ate it, and he is fed. The street food ecosystem served him. One of the most persistent myths about poverty is that it's a clean, legible condition, that people are either coping or they're not, that there's a clear line. The truth of Victorian London's food economy is messier and more interesting than that. There are gradations, there are degrees of managing and of not managing, and the availability of cheap hot food from street sellers, whatever that food actually contains, sits at the exact intersection of those gradations and makes certain versions of survival possible that should otherwise not be. That's the double truth of this world, inadequate and ingenious, disgusting and necessary. Something to be horrified by and something to be genuinely moved by simultaneously. The month turns. April becomes May. May becomes June. The great exhibition runs through October. Hyde Park fills with visitors from around the country and around the world. The trains bring them in from Manchester and Birmingham and Edinburgh. Ships bring them from France and Germany and America. 6 million of them, ultimately. The biggest thing London has seen in a generation. Thomas takes advantage. Not by going to the exhibition, by going to where the visitors are. 3 days a week through the summer, he moves his pitch. Not to Hyde Park, The authorities there have their own arrangements, their own approved vendors, their own careful management of the commercial opportunities around the Crystal Palace. But the routes the visitors take, the streets leading to the station, the corners near the boarding houses in Bayswater and Pimlico and Paddington, where visitors stay when they come to London. He doubles his baking days. He works with Mrs. Crick to adjust the filling. More consistent, better quality on the exhibition days, because the exhibition visitors are not the leather workers and the clerks. They've come a long way and they have a little more money and they can tell, just slightly, the difference between a good pie and one that's been assembled from necessity. "You'll go to Hyde Park," Thomas says one morning. "The pitch? Selling, not the park itself, the Knightsbridge end. I have an arrangement with a woman who has the licence there." An arrangement. You've learned not to ask too precisely about Thomas's arrangements. And so it is that on a Tuesday in June of 1851, you stand at the Knightsbridge end of the Serpentine Road with a warming can and 80 pies, and watch the world come to London. The visitors are extraordinary, not because they're grand exactly. Many of them are people like you, working people, day trippers who've saved for weeks to make this journey and who are still in the clothes they wore on the train, slightly dishevelled from hours of travel. But they're from somewhere else. That's what makes them extraordinary. They carry the shapes and sounds and habits of their other places with them. The man who buys the first pie of your morning is from Lancashire. You know because he tells you, immediately and unprompted, in a broad accent that's familiar, but not quite the same as London, not the same as Hertfordshire. He's in his 30s, solid, wearing a coat that says Wool Mill Town if you've spent enough time looking at coats. He takes the pie with both hands and bites into it, and his face does something that surprises you. It relaxes. He'd been tense. The tension of travel, of a strange city, of the slight bewilderment that comes from being surrounded by more people than you're used to, navigating streets you don't know, doing everything at a pace that London imposes whether you've agreed to it or not. And the pie, the hot pie, the familiar object, the thing that is the same in Lancashire as it is in Clerkenwell, the thing that costs a penny anywhere, and means food, means warmth, means a moment of not having to navigate anything, does what it's done for 100 years. It helps. Good, you ask? Aye, he says. Good. He walks on toward the exhibition. By mid-afternoon you've sold 67 pies and your feet have renegotiated their relationship with your boots in ways that are detailed and unfavourable. You sit on a low wall near the park entrance with the warming can beside you and eat the pie you've been saving for yourself. It's the one Mrs. Crick usually sets aside, the one that's slightly imperfect in some way that the paying customer might notice, that has an air hole a little too large or a bit of crust that's caught funny and gone dark at the edge. Today it's a slightly sunken top, not dramatic, not worth noting in any commercial context. You eat it and it's good. Around you, the city's doing its summer afternoon thing, light slanting across Hyde Park in long gold bars. Families in the park, actual families, which is something you don't see much in Clerkenwell, where the demographics run heavily to single working men and women. Here there are children in clean clothes, actually clean. The kind of cleanliness that means someone did laundry this week and the children are being supervised closely enough that they haven't yet remedied that situation. A woman passes you, pushing a perambulator. She's well dressed. Wool, but good wool, the kind that holds its shape. She barely glances at you. Your furniture. A fixed point in the landscape of the afternoon. This too, you've learned. The invisibility of service. Thomas explained it once in one of his compressed practical ways. You are the service. The moment they notice you is the moment something has gone wrong. Stand straight. Be clean, or as clean as the morning and the work allow. Have the product ready. Know the price. Don't give them a reason to notice you're there, only a reason to be glad that you are. You've been practicing invisibility for 8 months. You're getting better at it. The summer brings sweat and smell and trade that is brisk and exhausting in equal measure. It brings, on a Wednesday in late July, something else. It starts with the water. You notice it first because of the leather workers. 3 of them don't come to the pitch on Wednesday morning. Absent. No explanation, which is unusual. The ones who do come look different. Faster. More tense. Cholera, one of them says when you ask. Not to you specifically. To Thomas, in the way you'd tell the corner pharmacist about something spreading through the neighbourhood. A warning, an information transfer. Thomas's face doesn't change expression. Where, he says, Saffron Hill and Clerkenwell Green. Cholera. You know what cholera is. Everyone knows what cholera is. The epidemic of 1848 and 1849 killed 14,000 people in London. 14,000 in 1 year. From a disease that was still not fully understood, the prevailing theory blames miasma, the bad air, the stink of the city. The smell, people think, carries the disease. They're wrong about that. In 3 years, a physician named John Snow will demonstrate during a cholera outbreak in Soho that the disease comes from contaminated water, that a single water pump on Broad Street is the source of a cluster of cases, and that removing its handle stops the outbreak. He will demonstrate this by mapping the cases, by tracing the water, by doing the work of epidemiology before the word existed. But that's in 1854. Right now it's 1851, and nobody knows. What they know is, people are getting sick near the water sources in Saffron Hill, sick in the specific, terrible way of cholera. The rapid dehydration, the muscle cramps, the collapse into something that can go from feeling unwell to dead in a matter of hours. The wells on Saffron Hill, the leather worker says, people are saying not to use them. People are saying not to use them. In a neighbourhood where the water source is the public well, where the pump at the corner is the only way most residents get water, where the alternative, buying water from a water carrier, costs money that not everyone has. Not using the well is easier said than done. Thomas looks at you. Take water from the carrier on Hatton Garden from now on, not the well. That's 3p more a week. Yes. He says it in the way that means, I know the cost, pay it anyway. Some calculations are not about money. The cholera passes through the summer like a shadow. Present at the edges, worse in some streets than others, not touching Thomas's household this time. You carry water from the carrier, you boil it before you drink it. Which is not official advice, because official advice in 1851 on cholera still centres on the miasma theory, but which Thomas insists on with the authority of a man who survived 1849 by doing things that seemed excessive at the time. Mrs. Crick adds vinegar to everything. This is also not official medical advice. It is the kind of thing people do when they're managing uncertainty with the tools they have. The water question, where it comes from, what's in it, whether it's safe, is the great hidden variable in the Victorian street food story. Because everything on this list, every food we've talked about, is cooked in, or washed with, or produced near water. The eels live in the Thames. The watercress grows in streams that feed, downstream, into rivers that absorb what the city produces. The meat pies are made in kitchens where the water comes from pumps that draw from wells that are in too many parts of this city, not adequately separated from the cesspits beneath the buildings. This is the thing nobody in the street food world talks about directly, because talking about it directly leads to questions that are too large and too frightening to answer. It leads to, is this safe? And the answer to, is this safe, is sometimes. Sometimes it is, and other times you don't think about it. You eat what's hot, you drink what's been boiled, you buy from the sellers you trust, and you move forward. September. The Great Exhibition closes on October 15th. The Crystal Palace dismantled. The 6 million visitors gone home. London returning to its normal state of being merely enormous rather than additionally spectacular. In the weeks before it closes, there's a particular quality to the streets near Hyde Park, a sense of something ending, of people trying to get their last look, to hold on to the thing before it goes. The visitor numbers are highest in September. The cheap day tickets overwhelmed, the roads around the park clogged with omnibuses and private carriages, and people simply walking. Thomas has made more money this summer than any previous summer. He doesn't tell you this directly. He tells you in the way of things. Mrs. Crick has a new coat. The coal store is fuller than you'd expect in early September. The 3 unsold pies that usually come back at the end of the day have become 1, sometimes none. One evening he calls you into the back room after supper. He sits down at the table with his ledger, a small battered book in which he enters, daily, his income and his outgoings in a handwriting that is careful and slightly laborious, the handwriting of a man who taught himself to write as an adult, and he opens it to a blank page. He looks at it for a moment, then he looks at you. You know this trade, he says. You know it well enough. You wait. From January, he says, I'm going to give you a proper pitch. The corner of Ray Street. It's a good corner. There's a clockworks nearby and a print shop that I've supplied before. A proper pitch, your own pitch. You're 17 years old, and you've been in this city for 8 months, and you will, in January, have your own corner, and your own can, and your own cry. The pies will still be Mrs. Crick's, Thomas says quickly. You'll buy from her. Same price you've seen me pay. You nod. You'll keep what you make above expenses, after paying for pies and supplies. You do a rapid calculation. If you sell 70 pies at a penny each, the income is 5 shillings and 10 pence. Subtract the cost of pies, roughly 3 shillings for 70. That leaves 2 shillings and 10 pence, against which you pay your share of the lodging and food, which leaves you with perhaps a shilling clear. A shilling a day on good days. 6 shillings a week, more than twice what you earn now. Thomas is watching you do this calculation. He knows you're doing it. He does it every time he offers someone new terms. There'll be bad days, he says. Winter's bad, frost's bad, rain's bad. You'll lose days to things you can't control. I understand, he nods. The ledger goes back into the drawer. The conversation is over. You go upstairs. The attic room is cool in September, the first hint of the autumn that's coming. The window that doesn't close properly lets in a smell that is London going into autumn. Coal fires starting up again, a dampness in the air, the particular smell of leaves in the city that you hadn't expected but have come to recognise. The boy from Cornwall, the new Charlie, because the original Charlie has disappeared, as people in this lodging house sometimes do, without explanation and without much apparent disturbance to the household's functioning, is lying on his side of the mattress. He's from Truro. He arrived 3 weeks ago, and he is doing that thing that you remember doing, absorbing everything with an expression of controlled alarm, looking at the city and processing it in increments, getting used to the noise, the smell, the scale, the pace, the particular social rules of the streets that aren't written down anywhere, but are enforced with complete rigour. He'll be fine. You can see it in the way he's already started to move through the streets. Slightly more direct, slightly less flinching. 8 more months and he'll know where he is. You all right, you ask? It's big, he says. London? Yes. How do people manage here? You think about this for a moment. About Thomas on his corner, Mrs. Crick in her kitchen, the leather workers who eat and walk simultaneously, the coffee man with his dented boiler, the eel seller with her white basin, the link boy with his torch, the watercress girl with her numb red hands. 1 penny at a time, you say. He doesn't seem satisfied with this answer. You understand that. 8 months ago you wouldn't have been satisfied with it either. But it's the true answer. The city doesn't explain itself. It doesn't offer orientation or welcome or guidance. It doesn't tell you where the good pie stall is, or which water to boil, or which streets to avoid at night, or why the crossing sweeper looks the way he looks, or what the chalk marks on the wall of the eel shop mean. It just runs. All the time, in every direction at once. It just runs, and somehow in the running it feeds itself. Hundreds of thousands of people without kitchens, without tables, without the time or the money or the space to prepare food, are fed because other hundreds of thousands of people got up at 4 in the morning and made hot things and carried them to corners and sold them for pennies. The pie at 1 penny, the coffee at a halfpenny, the eel at a halfpenny, the baked potato at a penny, the oyster at a shilling a dozen, the watercress at a halfpenny a bunch. A city's hunger, answered 1 transaction at a time. Late October, the evening after the Great Exhibition closes. You and Thomas walked past Hyde Park on the way back from a supply run in Kensington, and you stood for a moment at the gate and looked in. The Crystal Palace was still standing, that strange, extraordinary building, 563,000 square feet of glass, supported by a cast-iron frame, built in 8 months, a greenhouse scaled to the size of an empire. But the last visitors had gone and the grounds were in the particular state of aftermath, the specific visual silence of a thing that has just stopped. Staff moving through the buildings, carts beginning to remove the displays, the elm trees, which the building was designed around, Paxton fitting his glass and iron construction around 3 enormous existing elms that stood on the site rather than cutting them down, because removing them would have required an Act of Parliament. The elm trees were going golden, the leaves showing October in the way only old trees do, the colour coming from inside the tree outward, the change that's been preparing all summer finally visible. 6 million people had passed through these doors. Most of them had eaten something on the way in or the way out, from one of the hundreds of stalls and sellers working the routes. The sellers who fed them were not inside the exhibition. Their names were not on any exhibit. There was no display of their contributions to the functioning of the modern city. But the city couldn't have run without them. Cannot. Present tense. Cannot. Thomas looked at the elms for a moment. Then he picked up his bag and turned for home. November comes in wet and dark. The mornings are brutal now. Not the dry cold of early spring, but the heavy, penetrating cold that the English winter specialises in, that gets into the bones and stays. The warming Cairns heat is more important now, a reason to buy that goes beyond hunger. People come to the pitch and stand near it for a moment longer than necessary, absorbing the warmth, delaying the moment when they have to move back into the cold. You've started wearing 2 pairs of socks. Your cry has settled. It came from the chest, finally. Something happened in October, some small internal adjustment, and the sound that comes out now is lower and steadier, and projects further and draws more looks. Thomas heard it one morning and made a sound. That was enough. Ray Street, January. Your corner, your pitch, your cry. At night the city pulls back. Not all the way. Never all the way. Even at 2 in the morning, even in the deep winter, there are lights, and there are sounds, and there are people moving through the streets for reasons that range from the completely explicable to the better not examined. London doesn't sleep because it can't afford to, but in the attic room the sounds filter down to something more manageable. The clatter of a late cart, the distant bark of a dog, the sound of the wind in the loose window frame, its particular rattle that has become, over 8 months, as familiar as your own heartbeat. The boy from Cornwall is asleep already. You lie on your back in the dark and think about January, about the corner of Ray Street, about what Thomas has told you of it, the clockworks, the print shop, the residential streets behind it, with their working families and their morning rush, about what it means to have a thing, a specific thing, a corner with your name on it, in the informal but absolute sense that a London street corner takes on the identity of whoever stands there long enough. Thomas's corner on Leather Lane belongs to Thomas, has belonged to him for 11 years, has his shape on it, his voice on it. The memory of 11 years of mornings and the customers who have come back and come back and come back. Your corner of Ray Street will in time have your shape. Ned Hawkins, from Hertfordshire, who came to London with a bundle of clothes and a letter of introduction, and is slowly becoming this. Someone who knows things, the weight of a bolt of cloth, the colour of good meat, the sound of a coin that's been clipped, shaved at the edges to steal a little silver, versus a sound one, the way a customer's shoulders tell you before they speak whether they're going to haggle, the smell of cholera in the water supply if Thomas is to be believed, though this is something you haven't tested and hope not to. Which streets to avoid at night, which streets belong to which men, where the coffee man starts his round and where he ends it, how the eel seller's parsley liquor gets its colour, why the leather workers eat before they go in, and why they eat fast and why they always come back. You close your eyes, the sounds of Clerkenwell settle into their nighttime register, quieter, further away, the city pulling its breath slightly. Somewhere out there, a late seller is still working. Probably the baked potato man. He works late, his customers being the theatre-goers and the pub-leavers, and the people who didn't manage to eat earlier and now need something hot to get home on. He'll still be at it for another hour at least, his cry more tired now than it was at noon, but still there, still carrying in the cooling air. And the coffee stall man on Farringdon Road. He never closes before 2, sometimes 3. His customers at this hour are the night workers, the all-night printers, the men who unload at the markets which start their business around midnight and are done by 4, and the overnight bakers in the cellars who are just now beginning. Because while the city rests, someone is always making tomorrow's bread. The whole machinery of feeding 2.5 million people is never fully still. It breathes in and out in shifts, one part sleeping while another starts, an endless relay that has no beginning and no end. The bread goes in the oven at midnight, so it's ready for the morning sellers who buy it at 4, so it's available on the street by 6, so the leather workers can eat it at 5:30 on the way to work. So the crust they bite through has been cooling for maybe an hour, warm still, the warmth that says someone else was awake all night for this. You were that someone in a different way. Mrs. Crick is that someone, every night. Already at it, probably, even now. The coal in the range, the smell of the onion, the press of the lids. There are people in this city who sleep less than you do, and work harder than you do, and earn less than you do. And the morning that you eat comes from their nights. This is the last thing you think before sleep takes you. Not as guilt, just as fact, just as the thing that is true and that sits in you quietly and changes, very slightly, the way you hand a pie to someone, the way you look at the people who buy, the understanding that you are not separate from them, that you are them and they are you, and the penny that passes between you is just the physical manifestation of a connection that goes deeper than commerce. We feed each other. That's what cities are in the end. Not the buildings, not the commerce, not the great institutions and the great exhibitions and the great men who get written about. Just people feeding each other, one penny at a time, one hot thing handed from one set of cold hands to another. The simplest thing in the world, the thing that makes the rest of it possible. The sounds fade. Or you do. The difference doesn't matter. The city out there continues. The potato man with his last customers, the coffee man with his dented copper boiler, the bakers in their midnight cellars, the eel sellers setting up for tomorrow, the watercress girls on their way in from Hertfordshire on the first carts, their baskets cold and wet and smelling of chalk streams and clean running water. All of it, all of them, still going, and you, in your attic room in this city that is too big and too loud and too complicated and too alive to comprehend all at once, are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a corner in January. You have a calling that found you before you found it, and it turns out to be exactly what you needed, in the way that things sometimes are. You have 8 months of learning in your hands and in your feet, and in the specific quality of your cry. The city will be here tomorrow. The city has always been here, and it will be here long after everything you know is gone. The smoke and the pieman's call and the trotters and the questionable meat in the pastry crust and the dented copper boiler and the smell of the Thames at low tide and the sound of the church bells at 4 in the morning, and Thomas's pale blue eyes watching the street with the patience of a man who has learned that the street always, eventually delivers. The buildings will change. The streets will be paved and lit and transformed. The railways will multiply and the underground will come and the smells will shift. The cholera will be traced to its water source and the great sewers will be built and the Thames will be cleaned, eventually over a century of slow and imperfect work, to something approaching what it was before the city turned it into what it is now. The Crystal Palace will be moved to Sydenham and stand there for another 80 years before burning to the ground in 1936. A fire so large it's visible from 8 counties. Smithfield will be enclosed and refrigerated and regulated. The live cattle market will move. The blood in the gutters will stop. Petticoat Lane will still be there, under a different name now, Middlesex Street. But the market still happens every Sunday morning. Some of the same energy, some of the same smell, not quite the same, but connected to it by a thread of continuity that you can feel if you're paying attention. And somewhere in this city right now, tonight, Someone is still selling food from a stall. Someone is still buying it with what they have. Someone is still eating, standing up, in the street, in the rain, because they have somewhere to be and not much time and a penny in their pocket and hunger in their stomach, and the knowledge that somewhere nearby something hot is available if you know where to look. Some things don't change. Hunger doesn't change. The impulse to feed it doesn't change. The exchange, the simple human exchange of a thing that was made for you by someone you'll never know, passed to you across a counter for a small amount of money, eaten quickly, forgotten almost immediately, sustaining you anyway, that doesn't change. Let it come. Let sleep come the way it came for Ned Hawkins on Clerkenwell Road, in the attic room above the kitchen where the oven was still warm from the evening's baking, in the city that never fully stopped, in the year that the world came to London and London fed it 1 penny at a time. Let the sounds quiet. Let the smells fade. The coal smoke and the pastry and the onion and the river mud and the specific layered living smell of a city at full sprint. Let your hands rest. You've earned it. The same as all the days behind you and all the days ahead and every morning that begins with the smell finding you before you've opened your eyes, and the cold hitting you when the blanket falls, and the work waiting, and the city waiting, and the people coming to the corner with their pennies and their hunger and their need for something hot. It'll all be there in the morning, but not now. Now there's only this, the soft dark, the slow city, the rest that makes the rest of it possible. Good night.